Back4Blood, the spiritual successor to the Left 4 Dead franchise, and absolutely hated for being just that, a spiritual successor. Now, that doesn't mean that Back4Blood is perfect, because it's not by any means, but to lazily call it a bad game or a copy of Left 4 Dead is just not fair. In fact, the games have less in common with one another than you might think. To start, I've played both, and I do like both games, but for different reasons. I want to try and keep the comparisons of the two down to a minimum, but instead, just look at Back4Blood. And why did it get such a bad rap? And why now? It's actually a pretty good co-op zombie shooter. Back4Blood, like Left 4 Dead, is a zombie co-op shooter with special enemy types, guns, health items, different cast of characters, but that's really about where the comparisons stop. The gameplay loop between the two is so wide because of one system added into Back4Blood. Back4Blood uses a card system to build a perk deck that supplies you with, well, different perks to support a certain playstyle. If you want to use grenades and kill bosses with like 3 of them because you put a bunch of buffs on for them, you can do that. It's one of my favorite builds. Do you just want to increase health and stamina? You can do that too. Play a tank. Become a glass cannon. There's literally a card called Glass Cannon. You can do that. There's even a card that gives you temporary health when you get a kill. Throw that on a melee build or a shotgun build. It's a lot of fun. These decks can even be built on top of the playable character's passive abilities to maximize their potential. There are enough different types of playstyles that there is a replayability factor there that I never really found there to be in Left 4 Dead. One of my favorites, like I said, is just running pure explosives build that I buy like 8 grenades and just cheese every enemy boss by just throwing them all at them. So no, I don't want to hear about the game being hard when I can literally use 3 grenades to kill an ogre. When the game was first introduced, you'd gain a card every level, so prioritizing used to matter more, which in my opinion made it more interesting, almost like a roguelike. But I digress. You get your entire deck now at the beginning. Makes the game a lot easier and a lot more fun to play on harder difficulties. And that's my terrible segue into the difficulties of Back4Blood. When the game first released, many people seemed to have issues just on veteran and nightmare difficulties. I think most of that just kind of stemmed from the poor deck building or bad synergy within them, making playthroughs harder. There really wasn't a great way to find decks besides just looking it up online. The game doesn't explain it super well. Not to mention, you also didn't get your entire deck to start like you used to. But I didn't really find I had that many difficulties back then, so I'm not sure what it really was. They even added another difficulty with no hope coming later in the game's life, so many people now just play on Nightmare instead. They also only give you a certain number of continues, and once you run out, you have to start the entire act or campaign over again. A lot of people find this annoying, but I think it really makes you have to play carefully for fear of having to restart. Along with the difficulty are the corruption cards that change with each level. This is another roguelike element, giving the zombies different buffs or mutations to make them and levels more difficult. Armored special infected, common enemies that explode acid when you kill them, that one ruined melee builds sometimes. Or bosses spawning in levels that once killed give you benefits to the teams, like more currency to spend at the next safe room. One just totally sucks ass though, looking at you, Ravenous. These are another welcome addition to me that make replayability more possible, as corruption cards can completely change the way you play a level, from the power being out and now it's dark to there's now fog limiting your visibility. It just makes each playthrough a little bit more different, more memorable. The game can also become pretty punishing after they added Hive Nests, where you can get currency for some special cosmetic and cards. Another thing they improved since launch is the currency gain rates. At launch, the grind for supply points, the currency for new cards and cosmetics, was abysmal, and it took forever to get more. They've since increased it, at least it definitely seems like it to me. The game is no longer a grind, and it's actually quite easy to get more cards compared to launch. Man, this game had a lot of launch problems. I'm sensing a pattern here. The story is nothing too extraordinary. The maps are decent, typically reward looking around to find better weapons or healing or support items. It's a co-op zombie shooter. The story is not something I'm extremely too focused on. It's okay. It's just not really... It's not anything too amazing. I just like playing a good horde zombie shooter. Same goes for the characters. I like the characters in Back4Blood, but I see so many people have complained they're lifeless compared to Left 4 Dead characters. but I think you learn just as much about this cast of characters as you do Coach and the gang. Plus, they have some cool cosmetics. Yes, I'm only ever wearing the Pogging Pug tank top or the tinfoil hat. No, I'm never changing. So, why did Back4Blood end up being deemed such a failure? In all honesty, I think the marketing department at Warner Brothers, the publisher, is a main issue with the game being so poorly received. Leading up to the release of Back4Blood, a lot of the marketing toted about how this game was from the creators of the Left 4 Dead series. Many people saw this as false advertising because many of the devs from those games left Turtle Rock for other places. And I think only around 5 devs from Left 4 Dead are still there. I think this is an extremely weak argument. I mean, Turtle Rock, the studio that made Left 4 Dead, is technically still the creator. You don't say, oh yeah, the creators of Left 4 Dead names all 100 or so devs that made the game. You say Turtle Rock made it. That's true. Turtle Rock made it. This is just people nitpicking, really, for anything they hate the game on. It isn't really false advertising. It was just a way for people poor at content creation to generate clicks and views for videos. That being said, I think they could have done without that moniker. But would the game have gotten any attention then? I think them using the creators of Left 4 Dead got the game out there, along with even naming the game Back4Blood. But this also kind of backfired by making many people think that it was a direct sequel when it really wasn't. It was just a spiritual successor. They should have emphasized that point more. It's a different experience. The second issue is why the game suffered was its launch was pretty buggy and really unbalanced. It took them a while, but in today's state, the game is largely bug-free and cards are pretty balanced for the most part. The game definitely needed a little more playtesting and time for debugging to take place, along with too few different enemy silhouettes and a card system that may seem overwhelming at first glance. So due to this poor marketing and release date, many people were disappointed in what they thought was Left 4 Dead 3 and berated the game, calling it bad, it's trash, it's a huge mess. But Turtle Rock continued supporting it until December of 2022 with 3 expansions. Tunnels of Terror added different weapons and areas for you to explore in the base game, like hive nests. New warped-ridden enemy types were added, but again, they weren't really distinguishable enough from one another. This update finally made the game feel more complete though, and definitely more well-rounded, while also adding 2 more characters to play as. The second DLC, Children of the Worm, finally got enemy variations right, making the new cultist enemies easily identifiable from each other while adding a new story and another character. The last DLC, Rivers of Blood, finishes the story up, adding a new special weapon, the last playable character, and a new game mode. These DLCs fully flesh the game out and make it one of the better co-op PvE shooters on the market in recent memory, along with games like GTFO. Yes, I think it's just as good. Back4Blood's state today is much better than it was upon release. The game has far more replayability, harder challenges, and a gameplay loop that feels definitely more rewarding enough to warrant my time playing it. Back4Blood didn't get a fair shake when it was released. Many of us compared it to games of the past, games that we love, Left 4 Dead 2. It even marketed itself as a successor to the best arcade-style co-op shooter in recent gaming. But that's not what Back4Blood is. It's its own entity. It shouldn't have tried and lived up to the success of those that came before it due to the people that created it, but instead found its own 2 feet and allowed itself to fully flesh out into the game it is. I find many of us also need to do the same. Don't worry about others' comparisons of others to ourselves, but instead, we should work to become the best versions of us and make others reflect back and see us for what we really are. Back4Blood has a lot going for it. The roguelike elements initially added into the game really make it something different from Left 4 Dead. It's more than just Left 4 Dead 3 in name only. What was an unpolished gem has really come into its own like. Maybe not a perfect diamond, but there's some shine to it, there really is. While there are a lot of valid criticisms for the game, especially at launch and leading up to it with its marketing, it's important to consider that a lot of the hate that was spewed, especially during release, was by people who like Left 4 Dead, who nitpicked incredibly small details that most of us wouldn't even noticed. Those people never gave the game a chance to be what it should have been, its own thing, a successor in spirit only. So I urge you to ignore the hate and give it a try yourself and see what you think. I think it really has come a long way. Thanks, guys. I'll see you next time.